Hello everyone, and welcome to my How to Build a Clan Boss Team guide. Now first things first, this is not a guide for unkillable teams. The purpose of this guide is to help new players build traditional style teams with damage mitigation to survive as long as possible. Clan Boss is not a race, it's a marathon. The fight will never end because you dealt lethal damage to him. The fight goes until you die, so it's important to build your champions to survive as long as possible. In this guide, we'll be going over which buffs and debuffs you want to bring, as well as the stats, gear sets, and masteries you should build your champions with. Up first is buffs. The single greatest damage mitigation buff in the entire game for Clan Boss is 50% ally protection. What ally protection does is, for the champion who cast it, all their allies will take 50% less damage, and the other 50% of the damage that was prevented will go to the champion who cast ally protection. The reason this is so powerful is, the Clan Boss has a passive ability called Gathering Fury, which steadily increases the amount of damage the Clan Boss deals over the course of the fight. The ally protection champion, instead of receiving 50% of the total damage as it has been modified by Gathering Fury, will instead take an amount of damage equal to what was dealt before the damage multiplier of Gathering Fury is added. This means your ally protection champion is only taking a tiny sliver of damage while the rest of your team has their damage reduced by 50%. Ideally, you should aim to have this buff up for each of the Clan Boss's attacks as possible. You can achieve this by bringing two champions who can apply this buff, or one champion who applies it and another champion who can extend it. Valerie is a rare champion who is farmable from campaign who can extend buffs. The next buff you want to look for damage mitigation is 60% increased defense. With this buff, you can build a champion with 2,650 defense and still reach the defense cap of 4,200. If you're building your champions with this buff in mind, be sure you're able to have it up for each of the Clan Boss attacks. Again, a buff extender like Valerie can help you keep it rolling. And if you can find it, 25% Strengthen is another great buff. It will decrease the amount of damage your team takes by 25%. Super simple, straightforward, nothing more to say about it. Just really, really good. And team-wide counterattack buff. It's really rare, but if you happen to have it, it's definitely worth bringing to the fight. There's only 3 champions in the entire game who have it. If you have one of these champions, they should absolutely find their way into your team. Each time a champion counterattacks, they only deal 75% of their normal damage, and they always attack with their primary skill. But even though the attacks have reduced damage, the counterattack is especially powerful because these counterattacks have a chance to apply debuffs and gain War Master and Giant Slayer hits as well. Team-wide counterattack will massively improve your damage per fight. The next buff you want to look for is block debuffs. This is a buff that becomes necessary if the Clan Boss difficulty you fight against regularly gets below 50% HP every day. Once the Clan Boss gets below 50% HP, he takes on a new random affinity: Force, Spirit, or Magic. With each of these affinities comes a different debuff. Force applies decreased attack, Magic applies decreased accuracy, and most devastating of all, Spirit applies decreased speed. It may not sound that bad, but if your team has any sort of speed tuning, this debuff will cause your team to fall out of sync. In addition to the affinity debuffs Clan Boss applies, no matter the affinity, he will always apply a stun to one of your champions once every 3 turns. Block debuffs will keep your champion who takes that hit from being stunned, which is very important for keeping your cooldowns in sync with the Clan Boss's attacks. If you do not have a block debuffs champion on your account, a champion with a cleanse is the next best thing. Now let's talk about which debuffs you want to bring. The absolute most important debuff for any Clan Boss team is Decrease Attack. Decrease Attack will reduce the damage your entire team takes from the Clan Boss's first and second attacks by 50%. Having Decrease Attack up for each of the Clan Boss's AoE attacks for the entire fight is absolutely vital. Getting a champion who has this debuff with a high chance to land on their primary attack, or a champion who has a 100% chance to land on a 3-turn cooldown should be your first priorities when deciding who to put on your team. It might not even be a bad idea to include multiple champions who can apply a decrease attack, just in case the debuff gets resisted by one or the other. If you have a team-wide counterattack buff, Champions with decreased attack on their primary skill become way more viable because each time they counterattack, they gain an additional chance per counterattack to apply the debuff. One of the most important debuffs to include for increasing your damage is Poison. Poison comes in two forms: 2.5%, which deals damage to the effective target equal to 2.5% of their max HP for each turn it's applied, and 5%, which deals damage equal to the affected target for 5% of their max HP at the start of the turn for each turn it's applied. The clan boss has a passive skill called Infernal Resilience, which reduces the amount of damage dealt to him by abilities that scale off his max HP. Even with this passive ability, each time a 5% poison deals damage, it will do 50,000 damage. The only way to increase that damage is with Poison Sensitivity debuff. A 25% poison sensitivity debuff will make it so your 5% poisons deal 6,200 instead. Poison Sensitivity is a very powerful ability, but it does nothing if you're not also applying poisons to the target. Champions with poison debuffs on their primary skill become much more powerful with a team-wide counterattack buff on your team. Each counterattack will give your poison champions an additional chance to apply their debuffs. Similar to poisons is HP Burn. Even though HP Burn is coded to deal damage equal to 3% of the affected champion's HP to that champion and all their allies, HP Burn will deal 75,000 damage to Clan Boss compared to the 50,000 damage a 5% poison would deal. I'm not entirely sure why it works that way, but it does. My best guess would be that it's because there can only be one HP Burn debuff on the target at once, while you could potentially have as many poisons on the target as that will fit on a debuff bar, which can hold a total of 10 at a time. Next, let's talk about Decreased Defense. Decreased Defense is another very important tool for increasing the amount of damage you deal each fight. Not only will it increase the amount of damage your champions deal by a good amount, but it will also increase the amount of damage dealt to the clan boss by War Master and Giant Slayer Masteries by about 10,000 damage. Additionally, be on the lookout for 25% Weaken. While not as powerful as Decreased Defense, it's definitely worth bringing if you can get it without sacrificing any of the other buffs or debuffs listed above. 25% Weaken will increase the amount of damage dealt by your champions by 25%, and just like Decreased Defense, it will also increase the damage dealt by War Master and Giant Slayer hits. Next up is Leech, a very powerful debuff that heals the champion for 18% of the damage they deal. Leech will also heal the champion off of War Master and Giant Slayer hits as well. Getting a War Master or Giant Slayer hit against Clan Boss while he's under Leech debuff will fully heal the attacking champion. If you have a champion who can consistently apply Leech and keep it up the whole fight, you may not need lifesteal gear on your champions to keep them healed up. Now, let's talk about choosing your team.
The A-Team.
Ideally, you'll be able to piece together a 5-man team that has all the above mentioned buffs and debuffs. The best way to achieve this is to look for champions who can do multiple jobs. A few great examples of champions who do this are Jareg, and Jareg, the Lizardman Epic, he has decreased attack on his primary skill, with not only increased defense, but ally protect on his secondary skill. These are the 3 most important abilities for clan boss damage mitigation in the game. And then we have Sepulchre Sentinel, who has a decreased attack A1, increased defense, and block debuffs on her A2. And then Seducer, he has ally protect on his A4, increased defense and block debuffs on his A3, and a decreased attack on his A2. The only caveat with Seducer is, in order to get his ally protect, his lady partner Temptress needs to be on the same team. However, this isn't even necessarily a bad thing, as Temptress brings a leech on her A2. So hopefully you're a fan of vampires, because Seducer and Temptress are a package deal. Now let's talk about gearing. I've already covered the importance of accuracy in my fundamentals of gearing video, so for the sake of this video we're just going to keep it short. If you're aiming for Nightmare Clan Boss, you should aim for a minimum of 180 and about a maximum of 240 accuracy. I've gone over mitigation by defense and raid and how it works in a previous video and how it scales with diminishing returns. For a more in-depth look into this mechanic, check out my How to Build a Tank video. For this guide, let's just say you want to aim for a total between 3,500 and 4,200. This is why the 60% and the 30% increased defense buff are so impactful on your team. With 60% increased defense, you can build your champions with only 2,650 defense and reach the defense cap of 4,200. That's like a free 1,500 defense. Even with a 30% increased defense buff, which is better than nothing, it allows you to gear your champions with only 3,230 defense and still reach the defense cap of 4,200. That's nearly 1,000 free defense. The value is immense. I would highly recommend getting the soft capped for defense of at least 3,500 on all your champions, even if you have to account for this with the defense buff to reach those numbers. Clan Boss is all about surviving as long as you can. Again, it's a marathon, not a race. And once you have your champion's defense covered, HP is the next most important stat for survival. A good number to aim for is between 30,000 and 40,000 if your gear can manage. Next, let's talk about speed. I plan to make a more in-depth guide on speed tuning in the future, as well as a guide on how to use community-made tools like Deadwood Jedi's Clan Boss Calculator in the future. But for now, we're going to try to keep things simple. The butter zone for speed on your Clan Boss champions, in my opinion, is between 171 and 175 speed. With all your champions running in the speed range, your team will work against Brutal, Nightmare, and Ultra Nightmare, and still be able to maintain a 1-to-1 turn ratio to the Clan Boss. When you're gearing your champions, think about the order you want them to go in. Which champion going first would benefit your team the most, and which champion going last would benefit your team the most. Gearing your team in such a way that you take their speeds into account to affect their turn order is called speed tuning. And as you start to climb to higher levels of Clan Boss, it is vital that you speed tune your team to get the max value out of them. An example of a super basic speed tune would be to have a champion like War Maiden be the second fastest on your team at 174 speed, so she applies her decreased defense ability before anyone else attacks. This way, everyone who attacks after her will deal more damage. And having a champion like Marked be the slowest on your team at 171, so no one takes a turn between her and the Clan Boss. This will ensure that everyone on your team gets 2 full turns of increased defense buffs, and having Valerie as the fastest on your team at 175 means she can extend the increased defense buff so it covers all allies for all 3 turns. And extend the block debuffs so it covers your team for the second AoE to avoid affinity debuffs as well as the stun. Now let's talk about gear. If you have a champion on your team who brings a ton of healing, and no, Seal of the Drakes doesn't count. Sorry Ash. But if you have a champion who can apply Leech with a very high level of consistency, like Grush the Mangler for example, you may not need lifesteal gear. If not, lifesteal gear may be a necessity. If you do have an awesome healer or Leech champion, you should consider at least Stalwart gear. And if you have a healer and an ally protect champion on your team, at the very least, your ally protect champion should be in Stalwart. And lastly, Masteries, probably the most important factor for Clan Boss. For Clan Boss, there is no mastery tree more important than the offense tree. There are 2 tier 6 masteries that will boost your Clan Boss damage more than any other, and if you've been paying attention, you may recall me mentioning them a few times already. War Master and Giant Slayer. How do you know which is better suited for War Master and who is better suited for Giant Slayer? It's pretty simple. If a champion doesn't have any ability that hits 3 or more times, War Master is better. If a champion has a primary skill that hits 3 or more times, or they have multiple skills that hit 3 or more times, Giant Slayer is likely better. Now let's talk support tree. If you're early game and your Great Hall is rather scant, the support tree is likely the more optimal route for your secondary tree. The reason being is there are 3 masteries, Pinpoint Accuracy, Charged Focus, and Swarm Smiter, that grant you additional accuracy. And if you've been paying attention, you will know by now how important accuracy is. In addition to these accuracy boosting masteries, there are 2 very powerful tier 5 masteries in the support tree as well, Sniper and Master Hexer. Sniper will increase your chance to apply debuffs by an additional 5%, and if your champion already has a 100% chance to apply their debuffs, this will do nothing. Do not take this mastery if this is the case. Master Hexer has a 30% chance to apply debuffs for an additional turn. If Master Hexer triggers when you apply a poison, instead of 100,000 damage over 2 turns, that poison will now deal 150,000 damage over 3 turns instead, and all that extra damage adds up over time. Now, if your champions don't have any debuffs they need to land on the clan boss, or you can get enough accuracy into your champion's builds without the aid of the support tree, the defense tree is the next best tree. Each champion who has taken the Blastproof Mastery gains 5% damage reduction from AoE abilities, and Delay Death will grant an additional 6% damage reduction. That's an extra 11% damage reduction from Clan Boss. The less damage you take, the longer you survive, the more poisons and War Master / Giant Slayers you can get in. The most powerful defense tree masteries for Clan Boss in my opinion are Retribution and Deterrence. If your Clan Boss team does not have one of the 3 champions in the game who can grant a team-wide counterattack buff, these masteries go a long way towards making up for that. Now, keep in mind, if your team has a block debuff champion who is blocking the stun, Deterrence will not grant you any value. Deterrence is for teams who use Cleanse to deal with the stun debuff only. And that's going to be all for this video, guys. I sincerely hope it was helpful to some of you out there, and if it was, consider giving the video a like. Doing so will help other players like yourself find this video in the future. And if you'd like to see more of my guides, please consider subscribing, as my channel is still very new, and subscribing goes a long way towards helping my channel grow. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and until next time, happy raiding. I pity the fool who don't like and subscribe.